So welcome everybody. For those of you that are not familiar with Congregation Kol Ami, we're Kol Ami in West Hollywood, California. Welcome. And I'm Rabbi Denise Eger, and with me is Rabbi Max Chaikin. And we are, as I said earlier, we are recording today's classes, and for the next 2 weeks, you are attending Beyond the Binary. We're going to be learning today about the spectrum of gender identity and gender expression with two experts. I'm so thrilled to present to you Ariel Zitney and Zevi Berman. Ariel uses he, they pronouns, is a queer, trans, rabbinical, and education student at our Reform Movement Seminary, the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. Ariel has received a BFA in creative writing from the University of British Columbia and an MFA in creative writing from Chapman University. He has 3 pieces published in my book, our book, collection Mishkan Ge'ava, Where Pride Dwells. Ariel is passionate about poetry, feminism, and cats when he's not working, studying, or thinking of ways to make Judaism more trans inclusive. Ariel enjoys watching Netflix and baking with his partner Zevi and their 2 cats. And welcome, Ariel, and also to welcome to Zevi Berman, who uses they, them, or ze, zem, zer. Zevi is a student also at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, studying towards cantorial ordination and a Master's of Jewish Education. Zevi describes themselves as queer, trans, non-binary, and genderqueer. They hold a BA in music from Bennington College with roots in song leading and music education at Union for Reform Judaism camps and New York City area synagogues. Zevi believes in the power of communal prayer and song as a tool for social change. As one of the first out trans cantorial students, Zevi is passionate about shaping our Jewish communities and Jewish rituals to become places of belonging for trans and non-binary Jews. In their free time, Zevi enjoys practicing handstands and baking challah, and Zevi lives in Los Angeles with their partner Ariel, and as you heard, 2 cats, which I hope Ariel and Zevi, you'll introduce us, at least tell us their names as we begin today. This is, as I said, 3 weeks that Ariel and Zevi are going to be with us, teaching us, and I'm just so thrilled to have them here. So thank you both for being here and teaching us, and thank you all for being open to new learning, perhaps for some of you. And I'll turn it over to our teachers.
Thank you so much for that wonderfully warm introduction. Our cats are named Lord Darlington and Turtle, and they live up to those names for sure. We have one very regal cat and one very less regal cat. So we are so excited to be in community with all of you today. And we want to give a little bit of an intro of what this 3-session workshop is going to look like. So this course is called Beyond the Binary. We're going to be looking at gender expansiveness beyond binary gender in Torah, in rabbinic commentary, and just in Jewish text in general. And through that lens, we're going to discuss what is the foundation of gender expansiveness in Judaism. So today we are going to specifically be talking about Adam Harishon, the first human being in Genesis. So this text, the creation text in Genesis, is one of the most popular texts to be taught in Torah in the Bible, and a lot of us have learned it through a very specific lens. So today we're going to be doing a little bit of challenging of some traditional lenses that we have previously learned this text through. And before we move forward, I want to invite you, if you haven't already, to add your pronouns to your Zoom name. So you can see on ours, after Ariel, it says he/they. After my name, it says they. You can do so by hovering over your picture and then clicking the 3 dots in the upper right-hand corner, clicking rename, and then adding your pronouns like we have them to create a welcoming environment for everyone. So as Rabbi Eger said, I'm Zevi Berman. I use they, them pronouns or ze, them, their pronouns.
And I'm Ariel Zitney, and I use he, him pronouns or they, them. So what will we do in this course? We will explore biblical stories through gender expansive commentary. We will be doing this by looking at various stories from the Torah and reading rabbinic commentaries on those stories, which suggest that our ancestors could have had more gender diversity than we have maybe originally thought. And through this, we'll learn a little bit about rabbinic text, as well as the Jewish tradition of interpretation. And additionally, we'll be learning more about the characters from our Torah and what our tradition says in general about gender. We will also meet the 6 rabbinic classifications of gender. So we have long believed that the gender binary was passed down to us from the beginning of time, that it is ancient and from ancient traditions such as Judaism. Although Judaism has played into the gender binary, we have also rebelled against it through the creation of our own gender categorizations with 6, possibly even 7 gender classifications. And while the rabbis thought of gender differently than we do today, we can learn from their multi-gendered worldview that Judaism has included more than male and female for around 2,000 years. And finally, we will reconceptualize Jewish belief about gender. Through learning about different Jewish conceptions of gender and different genders within Judaism, we can shift how we have conceptualized gender within Judaism and help shape our own Jewish communities to mirror this reconceptualization of gender.
So before we dive into looking at the Genesis text, we're going to take a moment to reflect on the knowledge that we already have about the creation story in Genesis. As I said before, this is one of the most famous parts of the Torah, the most famous parts of the Bible. So we are going to post this link in the chat. And Padlet is a wonderful website that allows us all to bring our ideas together in a collage of knowledge. So the question that we want to pose to you is, what do you already know about how the first humans were created in the Genesis story? So if you follow that link, you'll go to a website, and on the bottom right-hand corner, there's a little pink circle with a plus sign. When you click on that, you can add your comments to our plethora of knowledge about this story. And don't worry about getting it quote unquote right. There isn't really a right answer to this question. There are so many different lenses that we can look at Torah through. And all of us have already encountered some of them, most likely. And today we're going to look at some that might be a little bit less familiar to some of us. And at the end of our session, we'll take a look at this Padlet again, and we'll see how our ideas have shifted throughout the course of our time together today. So take a few moments now to add a comment or a few comments to this document. All of your answers will be anonymous, so you don't have to worry about that. And I look forward to seeing our collage of knowledge as we add to it together. So I see already that there are a few answers. They were both made male and female together. That there are 2 versions of the creation narrative, some slightly different details in how they were both created. These are wonderful things. We're going to touch on both of those. Lilith is there somewhere, but not biblically. That is true. We're not going to get into Lilith because Lilith is not biblical. Lilith is part of interpretations added to the story.
But we will be talking about other interpretations.
Yes.
So that is another direction that could be taken.
For sure. So I see that one person wrote a rib from Adam to make Eve, or a side of Adam makes Eve. This is another thing we're going to be talking about today. I'm so excited that you're already heading in these directions. In God's image is something that I see up here, male and female. and that in the two creation stories, the order of creation is different. Absolutely. I also see that some people have less background in studying Genesis. That is also totally fine. We are happy if this is your first time studying this text. That is fine too. We will do that together. So I see that people are still typing, and I want to encourage you to continue adding to this document. But just because of time, we are going to continue, but this document will continue to be a space for us to collect our knowledge together. So we want to give a note on translation. We'll be looking at the Hebrew of Genesis, and we've translated it in a very specific way. So the word Adam is generally thought of as a man named Adam when we think of the Genesis story, when we think of the creation of humans. So we'd like to start by challenging this assumption, and I'll tell you why. So as you probably know, Hebrew is a very gendered language. That means that all Hebrew words have gender, including words like tree or water or table that don't have anything to do with the way that we understand and experience gender as people. So the word Adam in Hebrew simply means human. So just as with objects that don't have gender, Adam is gendered. It's in the masculine form. But I want us to see that as more of a grammatical construct and less of a reflection of the gender of the first human, of the first Adam. Just because the word human is masculine in Hebrew, that doesn't mean that all humans are masculine. And you'll see in the translation that the words like he or him or his, we don't use that for Adam, the human. Even though those of you who know Hebrew will see that there are masculine pronouns in the original text. This is because English is not as much of a gendered language as Hebrew. So we don't attach gender to objects in English. So we have used pronouns it and they for Adam, the first human, to make sure that we can distinguish both between singular and plural, and wait on the gendering until we find specifically gendered words. So we will get to gender, we promise you, but gender is specified in the text, and we want to make sure that that's highlighted when it comes up.
So this was actually mentioned in our Padlet that we have two creation stories in Genesis. I know when I first started learning more Bible study and learning about stories in the Torah, it was a surprise to me to learn that there were two stories, because I had learned a version that took the first creation story and the second creation story and mushed them together to create a new singular creation story. And that was what I was taught when I was younger. And I imagine most of you might have been taught something similar. So for those of you who hadn't heard until today, we just wanted to clarify that there are two creation stories in Genesis. And we will be doing a deep text study of each of them separately and comparing and contrasting them to learn more about each of them and what they can teach us, not only about the creation story, but about the creation of the first human.
So a few framing questions as we begin to encounter the text. Where is the Adam placed in the order of creation? How was the Adam created, and why? For what purpose? And how many humans were created in this story? We'll specifically look at Genesis 1, the first creation story, and then we'll compare and contrast that with Genesis 2. So see if you can keep these questions at the forefront of your mind as we look at the text. So we're going to summarize a little bit of Genesis 1 so that we can really get to the meaty part of the creation of humans. Okay, here's a short highway summary. When God began to create the heavens and the earth was tohu vavohu, unformed and void. There was a darkness over the surface of the deep and a wind of God sweeping over the water. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness, calling the light day and the darkness night. There was evening, there was morning, a first day. On the second day, God separated water from water, creating an expanse which was called sky. On the third day, God gathered the water below the sky together, creating dry land, which was called earth. On the earth, God created vegetation of every kind that bore seeds. On the fourth day, God created lights in the sky that shined upon the earth to separate day from night, serving as signs for the days and the years. The greater light dominated the day, and the lesser light dominated the night, separating light from darkness. On the fifth day, God created swarms of living creatures from the waters, birds that fly in the sky, and living creatures of every kind that creep. God blessed them to be fertile and multiply. On the sixth day, God created cattle, creeping things, and wild beasts from the earth. And continuing the sixth day, finally, we get to the creation of human beings. So a reminder that we'll translate Adam as human, and we're still waiting to encounter gender in the story. So we read, Vayomer Elohim na'aseh Adam b'tzalmenu kidmutenu v'yirdu v'yidgat hayam ve'of hashamayim uva'bahema uva'chol ha'aretz uva'chol haremes haromes al ha'aretz. And God said, "Let us make Adam, the human, in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on the earth." Okay, I feel like we can answer the first two of our guiding questions given this verse alone. Where is the Adam placed in the order of creation? Feel free to drop in the chat. In all of the days that we have heard about so far, where is human in this order? I see, yeah, last, absolutely. Sixth day. So the Adam, the human, was one of the last creations in the creation story. And the who is our is a really interesting question that we can talk about theology and all sorts of how we describe God. And we don't have time for that today, but that is a very wonderful question. And I would encourage you to hang on to that. So how was the Adam created? What is this creation process that we hear about? And why? Why are humans necessary according to the creation in Genesis 1? What is the how and what is the why of the creation of humans? Feel free to drop in the chat if you want to participate. To rule over other life. Yes. And creation seems to be simply God's utterance. There isn't so much fanfare. God says, "Let us make Adam," and then there was Adam. And I see that someone pointed out in the image of God, this is something that becomes really important in Genesis 1 in the first creation story, that humans were created in the image of God. And we'll see that again in the very next verse. So this is the very next verse. This is one of our main verses that we are going to focus on today. We read, Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam b'tzalmo, b'tselem Elohim bara oto, zachar unkeva bara otam. And God created the Adam in God's image. In the image of God, God created it. Male and female, God created them. So as someone dropped in the chat, the idea that the Adam is created b'tselem Elohim, in God's image, is not only in Genesis 1:26, but it's repeated again in Genesis 1:27. And when we find repetition in Torah, that means that the Torah is cueing us that this is a very important thing. So the fact that humans were created in God's image is one of the most important things that we find in Genesis 1 because it's repeated so often. So how many humans were created in this story? This was our last guiding question, and it's a little bit of a tricky question to answer. So I would love to know, from your perspective, how many humans do we have so far in this creation story? I see a person said 1, maybe all of them. It's not really specified. So a question of, in the Hebrew, is it plural or singular? That is a great question, and we're going to answer that in just a second.
Well, we see it reflected in our translation, right? That
Yes.
we put in. So in our attempt to degender our translation, but to match the singularity or the plurality of the Hebrew, at first, God created it. We have a singular object. And then male and female, God created them. We have the plural. So we have in this verse singular and plural mentioned, which brings up the confusion. Which one is it?
Absolutely. So it's a little bit hard to tell how many human beings we have, but we see that it is called ha'adam, the human. Even though the language uses both singular and plural, it seems to imply that we do have one human being. But then how could it be zachar unkeva, male and female? God created them and God created it, the singular human being. There's a whole bunch of confusion here. And as we know about confusion in the Torah, that is what the rabbis absolutely love. And that is the crux of the commentary on this verse. But before we go into unpacking what the rabbis thought about this, I would love to know how you all would explain this discrepancy between God created singular Adam and God created them, plural Adam, male and female, zachar unkeva. How would you conceptualize this creation? How would you explain this grammatical inconsistency? So I see, if it was binary, it would be male or female, and that it's inclusive of male and female. So we are created in the image of God. God is described as one, but also singular and plural, similar to how humans are described. And if we're made in the image of God, we must be both singular and plural as well. I really love that. I've never heard that one before, and that's a really interesting thing for me to think about. So maybe an attempt to accommodate gender neutrality in a gendered language. Absolutely. And like the yin yang, humanity as a whole has a varying balance of these aspects. Infinite variety is possible. I also see perhaps God couldn't capture God's unique oneness in the creation plan. So there's a biological plurality that paradoxically expresses that unity. And also possibly it's a singular non-binary human. I'm already so inspired by all of the different comments that you're dropping in the chat. I think this is wonderful. I love the way that you think about this. And I'm excited to see whether the commentators, the rabbinic commentary, thinks along the same lines that we're thinking about now.
So now that we have explored the first creation story a little bit, we're going to take a look at the second creation story, which takes place in Genesis 2. And to help frame our study, we're going to look at these same questions, but think about them, how they appear in Genesis 2, and whether that is similar or different than how we saw it in Genesis 1. So first question, where is the Adam placed in the order of creation? Second question, how was the Adam created and why? And then our last question, how many humans were created in this story? So we're going to consider these questions as we read Genesis 2 and think about how our answers to these questions might be different than they were for Genesis 1. When God made earth and heaven, there were no shrubs on the earth, no grasses in the fields, because God had not yet sent rain down to the earth, and there was no Adam to work the soil. Instead, water would well up from the ground and water the whole surface of the earth. And God formed the Adam from the dust of the earth. God blew into the Adam's nostrils the breath of life, and the Adam became a living being. So a summary of the verses 8 through 21. God made a garden in Eden and placed the Adam there. There, God caused trees to grow that were beautiful and good for food, with the tree of life in the middle of the garden and the tree of knowledge of good and bad. A river flowed from Eden to water the garden that then branched in 4 directions. God placed the Adam in the Garden of Eden to tend to it and warned the Adam to eat from any tree except the tree of knowledge. God said, "It is not good for the Adam to be alone. I will make a helper opposite the Adam." God created beasts from the earth, birds of the sky, and brought them to the Adam to name them. From all the animals, no suitable helper opposite the Adam was found. So to return to our framing questions, let's go through them together. So where was the Adam placed in the order of creation? So we saw in the first Genesis story that the Adam was created last. But in this Genesis story, the Adam is actually created first. The Adam is created and then there is nothing for the Adam to tend to, or no friends for the Adam to live on the earth with. So then God creates plants and vegetation and also creates other animals. So our second question, how was the Adam created and why? Let's open this up to the chat. You can write your answer in there. How was the Adam created in the second creation story? So in the first creation story, we saw God spoke, right? God spoke and things came into being. What happens in this creation story? From the earth, right? So God grabs dust from the corners of the earth, uses the dust and breathes life into it. So we see a combination of earth and breath of life. And then our third question, how many humans were created in this story? So we see that God noticed that Adam was alone and God created other animals, but among all of those other animals, none could stand beside the Adam as an equal. And so we see that even though the animals were created to potentially be companions to the Adam, we only have still at this point one human, one Adam, and that human is alone.
So in a moment, we're going to get to the creation of human being number 2 in Genesis 2. And if you think back to the Padlet that we created at the beginning of class, many of you, or a few of you, named 2 different human beings in the creation story. If you think back to your background knowledge, what do you already assume about the creation of this second human? Who do you assume that they are, and how do you assume that they were created? So specifically in these next verses of Genesis 2, we've chosen to not translate one word. And this is because the translation of that word is disputed among the rabbis. This word is tsela. So when we encountered tsela, I want you to try to fill that in, given your background knowledge of what you think tsela means. Additionally, we're going to see how the second human being was created in Genesis, the specific text that we read in Torah, and then the rabbinic interpretation of it. And then finally, where do you find gender in these verses? So far, we haven't really seen very much about gender. Ha-Adam has continued to just be the human with no real gendered insinuations at all. So we're going to finally see how gender explicitly is stated in the text in the next few verses. Okay. We read, Vayapel Adonai Elohim tardema al ha'adam, vayishan vayikach achat mitzlotav, vayisgor basar tachtena. So the first Adam, God caused the Adam to fall into a deep sleep. And while the Adam slept, God took one tsela from the human and closed up the flesh at that spot. So think to yourself, what do you think this tsela is? How have you been taught this story if you have in the past? And we'll continue. Vayiven Adonai Elohim et ha'tsela asher lakach min ha'adam le'isha, vayivieha el ha'adam. And God fashioned the tsela that God had taken from the Adam into Isha, into a woman. And God brought her to the Adam. Okay, so how would you translate tsela according to any background knowledge that you have about this story so far? So I see that one person was taught that it is a rib, and another person was taught that it is a rib or a side. Foreshadowing for rabbinic commentary. I know that when I grew up, I was taught tsela means rib unconditionally. And then I read rabbinic commentary, and it turns out it's quite disputed. But before we move on to that, how was the second human being created in Genesis? According to this verse, where did the second human being come from? God puts Adam to sleep, absolutely. And it's from the flesh of the first human. So the second human being came from the first. And I want to clear up tsela and b'tselem are two different Hebrew words because the roots share two letters, but not three. So Hebrew words are built on three-letter roots, and they're close, but not quite the same thing. Okay, so the third question, where do you find gender in these verses? Where's the gender? What words are specifically gendered? Isha, woman. Absolutely. So we don't get very much about the gender of the first person, except for that the first person is Zachar unkeva, male and female, but the second person, instead of being called nekeva, female, is called Isha, a woman. Okay. I absolutely loved the interpretations that you brought to the very tricky verse in Genesis 1. And we're going to see how the rabbis agree or disagree with some of your interpretations and attempt to combine Genesis 1 and 2 into one creation story.
So we're going to learn a little Breshit Rabbah now, and this is a Midrash on Genesis. And Midrash is a type of rabbinic commentary. The Hebrew root drash, also used for a sermon, a drash or a drasha, comes from the word to mean interpret. So it is used when we take something from the Torah, something from our Bible, and we expand upon it to offer our own interpretation. Maybe something was confusing or something was perhaps left out. Maybe we don't have a lot of information about something. And so the rabbis created a genre of literature called Midrash, where they offer their own interpretations on biblical text. And so that is what we did a little bit ourselves. We offered our own interpretations with the questions that we had from the text. And so now we will read from Breshit Rabbah, where the rabbis offer their own interpretations on Genesis. But before we get started, I want to clarify a term or define a term that we will see in this interpretation. Androgynos is one of the 6 rabbinic categories of gender. And androgynos is defined as a person who has both male and female characteristics. So as I had said earlier, there are 6, potentially 7 different genders in rabbinic text. And these classifications of genders are different from how we would see gender today. So in modern times, we all have a conception of gender that has been very largely influenced by gender theory and by more specifically Judith Butler. And because of that, many of us probably have a distinction between the words gender and sex, where we might think of gender as being an identity that refers to our standing in society, the way that we understand ourselves, and the way that we interact with others that is impacted by culture. So that is generally what we think of when we think of gender. And when we think of sex, we generally think of a biological and physiological makeup of a human body, which we separate from gender. And we see these, many of us see these as separate. However, we're going to go back in time 2,000 years to put ourselves in the mindset of the rabbis, and they did not have this distinction between gender and sex. And therefore, when I say the word gender, I am combining what we would consider to be modern day gender and modern day sex. And I am including both of those within the word gender. So this includes the way that someone might identify and interact in society, as well as their body and their physiological makeup. So because of this, when we talk about these 6 classifications of gender, this can be expanded to be seen as potentially a gender expansive view of identity, similar to what we see in trans inclusion with different inclusion of different gender identities. But it could also refer to intersex identities, where someone is physiologically born unable to be classified as male or female based on their biology. So I just wanted to make a note that when we talk about these different classifications of gender, and when we talk about specifically the androgynos, it could be a physiological condition, or it could be a social, cultural place categorization, classification.
And if this is new and a little bit confusing to you, that is okay. We're going to go more in depth of the 6 genders of Rabbinic Judaism in our future workshops together. So don't worry if this is a little bit destabilizing for you right now.
We will explore all 6 of them, but for today, we're only going to look at the androgynos because that is what we meet in this rabbinic interpretation of Genesis. So here in Genesis Rabbah, it says, Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar said, at the time when the Holy One, blessed be God, created the first Adam, God created it as an androgynous, as it is written, male and female, God created them. So we can see here, again, the confusion with the words male and female, God created them. We saw this verse earlier, and we attempted to explain how a singular human could be described with the words male and female, God created them. So how does Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar attempt to explain the verse, male and female, God created them? You can put in the chat how Rabbi Yirmiyah solves this confusion. Rabbi Yirmiyah says that the first human was created androgynous. Exactly. The figure that it's referring to is a specific male and female gender, that there is one human being, and within that one human being is male and female. So how does Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar's explanation compare to how we all interpreted this verse and offered some insights into what this verse could possibly mean? Does it connect with something that you had thought, or is it completely different from what you had conceptualized when you had read this verse? We had some people earlier who had read that first verse as thinking that multiple people had been created and perhaps even all of humanity already. So male and female was encompassed because there was more than one person at that time. But we had other people who thought exactly what Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar suggested, is that there was one person, but this one person was different and contained male and female within them. So we'll explore this a little bit more because Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar said this, but he was in a classroom full of people, and they all of his peers didn't necessarily agree with him right away. There was a little bit of a debate first, and we'll go into that.
Actually, before the debate, Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman even built upon what Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar said. So he took Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar's idea and then expanded it to create a visual for us. And it is a wacky visual. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman said, at the time when the Holy One, blessed be God, created the first Adam, God created it with a double face, one on each side, and split the Adam along the middle and created two backs, one back here and one back there. One of the wackiest visuals I have ever seen in biblical commentary. So how does Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman build on Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar's interpretation of the Adam as an androgynous? So I see a few people saying it reminds you of the Greek thing. I also can't remember the philosopher. If anyone can remember the name of the philosopher who described people being stuck together as two and then split. For sure, this mythology is shared among multiple cultures.
We have an answer of Plato in the chat.
Thank you. So that makes a lot of sense. So it's similar to Plato's idea, Greek philosophy, that says that human beings were originally two and then became one.
And we can see too with the word androgynos, even though we have it written in the Hebrew characters, it is originally a Greek word. So we have sharing of cultures there too.
Absolutely. So according to Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar and Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman, where does the second human being come from? How was the second human being created? Feel free to write in the chat so we can learn from each other. Rabbi Shmuel concretizes the idea that what it would mean to embody both and physicalizes it. Yes, Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman gives us a visual. Yes, so the second human was created simultaneously, and then both were split apart. Splitting the first in half is how we got the second human being. And I love that someone brought in the word tsela, because that is exactly where this commentary is headed next.
And we also have a comment of the origin of love for anyone who has seen Hedwig and the Angry Inch. That is exactly what we're talking about here. So we have it in our tradition as well.
Okay, so we imagine a room full of rabbis, two of which are Rabbi Yirmiyah ben Elazar and Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman, but there's other rabbis, and the other rabbis challenge these two and say, doesn't it say God took one of the tselot, which in Hebrew is a plural of tsela, from the Adam? Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman replied to them, it means one of its sides, just as we see in a quote from Exodus 26:20, and for the tsela of the tabernacle, which they translate as side of the tabernacle. So we'll unpack this a little bit. They challenge him because they believe that tsela means rib, as a lot of us grew up believing that Eve was created from Adam's rib. We turn that right on its head and say tsela can't mean rib all of the time, because it wouldn't make sense to say rib of the tabernacle. We say side of the tabernacle. So we understand that the way that the second human being was created was from the tsela, from the side of the first human being, by splitting the first human, Ha'adam, along the middle, creating two sides of human beings. So one side does not necessarily mean left or right, could be front, back. It's that there are two faces and they share a back, and then they're split alongside the back. So Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman makes a case that the first Adam was not simply the one who had a rib that was made into a second Adam, but that the first Adam was a combination of the two that was then split along the side, along the tsela. So I'm wondering, what do you think of this interpretation? And what does it mean to you that according to this text, according to this rabbinic commentary from the 4th to the 6th century, we are all descended from a multi-gendered first human being? What is the significance of this to you? I'm guessing that there are some people typing, and as we are, oh, I see some responses coming in. As a non-binary individual, it is very validating. I share that. As a non-binary individual, it's also very validating to me that there is a gray space, and that it says that modern Jewish thought is afraid of past interpretations and implications. That's a very interesting comment, that we have a history of gender expansiveness, but we don't see it as much in modern Jewish thought. Since humans are in God's image, it points to the multiplicity of gender in God. Oh, I love that.
That's beautiful.
It means that having varying degrees of male and female is biblical, comes from the very foundational text of Judaism, and that genders aren't necessarily opposites of each other. If humans were multi-gender back then, we would still be multi-gender. That actually leads into a wonderful Hasidic teaching that I want to share with you, that when the first human being, when Adam was split into two, that split wasn't exactly along the lines of male and female, of masculine and feminine, that there was a little bit of wibbly-wobbliness in there, and that all of us as singular human beings today have a little bit of masculine and feminine as a part of us. Because we are all descended from a multi-gendered being, we all are inherently a little bit multi-gendered. And for me, I love that because it's validating of the gender expansiveness that I see in all of us, in all human beings, to some extent, small or large. I also love the idea that, and this is a comment, that it destabilizes the men came first line of thinking regarding sexism, that we can't any longer use the Genesis story to reinforce sexism, because if we all come from a multi-gendered being, there is no hierarchy of gender.
So with all of that in mind, we will tie it all together with this literary term, merism, which is referring to the idea that two contrasting parts, two opposing opposites, combine to refer to the whole of the sum of their parts. So as we explore the line, male and female, God created them, we are using this line to explore gender expansiveness. And yet the line itself may seem to reinforce a gender binary, but we'll use merism to show how this perceived binary is actually more expansive. So also in our creation story, we read, there was morning and there was evening, a first day. On one side, we have one extreme. On the other side, we have the other extreme. But instead of seeing these two opposing extremes as singular and separate, we should see them as a spectrum, which includes everything in between them. So with the morning and evening, there was a first day. Just because morning and evening are the only words that we are given doesn't mean that we don't also have dawn and dusk, that there isn't a midday heat, that twilight doesn't exist. So we know that even though morning and evening are the only words given, that this encompasses everything in between morning and evening, and in between evening and morning. And so similarly, when we see male and female, God created them, if we see them not as a dichotomy, but instead as a merism, then we can see that God has created the spectrum of gender between male and female and encompassing everything, every possibility within that.
So as we wrap up today, I want us to go back to the Padlet that we started at the beginning of our class. And we will drop the link in the chat one more time. And I want you to reflect on the question, how has your understanding of the first humans in Genesis shifted? What do you now know about the humans in Genesis, the creation of human beings? As we said in the very beginning, there are limitless ways to interpret Torah. And this is one specific way in which we can see the multiplicity of gender represented in some of our foundational Jewish texts and in some thousands of years ago commentary by our rabbis. So I encourage you to drop some more comments in our Padlet, and it can continue to be a living document for us, a compilation of our knowledge together for our time here today.
Thank you. We'll look forward to seeing your answers come up. And also, if you have any additional questions or thoughts that you're having that you'd like to share in the chat, we welcome that as well.
I've really enjoyed hearing all of the different interpretations that you bring to this text, and it has helped me deepen my knowledge also of this text. I really appreciate learning it in community with all of you.
Okay, we have some answers coming in. It wouldn't really be Jewish if there was only one interpretation. I love that. Yes, we love interpreting text and we love offering multiple interpretations. And as we had showed earlier with multiple people bringing up Lilith, Lilith is another interpretation which we didn't even touch on. So there are so many interpretations. And we just want to make sure that all of the interpretations are available to study so that we can create our own interpretations that are well-rounded and based in Jewish tradition. The story isn't as binary as I was taught. There's even multiple ways to interpret the way. Oh, it moved. Sorry. I lost that one. But yes, not as binary as you may have thought.
Multiple ways to interpret the way Adam has multiple genders. Padlet sort of bounces things around as people add.
This session has been recorded, so it will be available to be viewed again. So there was a question in the chat about other words for male and female of different gender identities. We do have some other words. It's not as expansive in Hebrew as it is in English, but we will explore those in, I believe it's our next session.
I think so.
So stay tuned. We'll look into the other different genders.
Gets even more infinite, even more complex, as we are as humans.
So thank you all so much for your participation and your insight. We learned from you as well today. It was a pleasure and a joy.
Thank you so much, Ariel and Zevi, for opening our eyes. As the blessing of the morning says, we praise God who opens the eyes of the blind. And in this way, you're opening our eyes to words that we've read maybe and heard many times before, but we've been blind to many opportunities to see differently and to understand differently and to know differently. So thank you so much for teaching us. A reminder that yes, this recording will be available on the Kol Ami YouTube channel later this week. If you want to go and review before next week's session with Ariel and Zevi, which will again be at 4 o'clock on Sunday, April 4th, right here in this same Zoom room. So your same link, we'll resend the link out later in the week so you don't have to go search through all your emails. But Ariel and Zevi are going to take us even to a deeper dive into this topic of gender identity and gender expression from Jewish tradition, where you'll really have a greater grasp of how our tradition has approached this and often covered it up. And I think that's what's so powerful about the learning that Ariel and Zevi are sharing with us, is that it is inherent in our tradition. And this is the foundation for how we make and build and promulgate a truly inclusive Jewish life across the gender expression and identity spectrum. So thank you all so much for being here this afternoon. Again, to Ariel and Zevi, thank you so much for your knowledge. We invite you, if you enjoyed today's session, to make a donation to Congregation Kol Ami at kol-ami.org for in honor of our teachers and learning that we've done together and learning Torah. And we'll look forward to seeing you next Sunday. And just a reminder, Yom HaShoah is coming. Holocaust Memorial Day is coming this week, Wednesday night, the 7th, and Thursday, the 8th. And we'll be hearing from Dr. Marguerite Feinstein, who's the Assistant Professor of Jewish Studies at Loyola Marymount University. Will be with memorial prayers and music and reflections, but also she'll be addressing us on how do we memorialize the Holocaust when all the survivors have died. And so really challenging us to think about how we perpetuate the memory and of what happened to our people. So again, we invite you to this and many more programs. You can learn more at kol-ami.org. And we look forward to seeing you next Sunday. Again, Ariel and Zevi, thank you so much. Rabbi Chaikin, always thank you so much for all you do. And we'll wish everybody Erev Tov, a good evening and a great week ahead. Shavua Tov. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.